Hey, Ernest, it's good to be here. I think we just agreed that I'll kick it off, but it's good to meet you, and you're joining us from San Francisco, correct?
I am, Kunal. It's great to be here. Excited about our conversation and all things that are happening in venture capital.
Yeah. I'm based out here in New York. I can give some background on Hearst Ventures if that's helpful, and then would love to hear more about on your side too, and some of my background. But we're at Hearst Ventures. I'm a principal there now. We're doing anywhere from Series A through C investments. The Hearst Ventures team is broken up into a couple of different investment professionals. Some focused on media, some focused on logistics and transportation, some focused on financial services and insurtech. We made, and I'm primarily focused on healthcare at the moment. Hearst is diversified where it's not only focused on media anymore. There's now separate verticals around financial services, transportation, mobility, and healthcare. We're actually investors in FreightWaves as of 2.5 years ago. So excited to be here for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap in from where I'm at now, as well as like what I was doing before. So my name's Ernest Sweat. Everyone, I am a associate partner at GreatPoint Ventures. We're a San Francisco-based firm that invests in seed through Series B, although our sweet spot is Series A. We invest in all things enterprise as well as health and wellness. And so, health and wellness for us includes healthcare tech, some biotech, and food tech. And I also was a former investor in FreightWaves during my time at Prologis Ventures. I was one of the founding team members there, where I invested in a lot of logistics tech, a lot of e-commerce enablement, and industrial IoT.
Nice. Wait, given actually, since it's a good place to kick off the conversation, given everything that's going on, it would be great to hear about what you're seeing on the healthcare side of the market. I mean, I've been focusing on it, but doing it about a year now, and trying to get smart on the space. It would be interesting just to hear what you're seeing on healthcare and wellness right now.
Yeah, well, you're a couple quarters ahead of me because
Okay. We'll figure it out.
yeah, it's I wouldn't call myself like the best healthcare investor yet.
And I think everything changed too, so it's hard.
But I think it's consistent with a lot of the other themes that we're investing in and that I've invested in the past, right? This pandemic has really kind of literally put a light on a number of trends that were already happening,
Right.
and they're continuing to just accelerate now. So the need for better data for all stakeholders within the healthcare system to make better decisions, um, how to get resources, how in a better light, how to utilize our best assets, which are those healthcare workers, in the best light. So you're seeing like the telemedicine
Right.
has really ramped up, but then also how do we get the right services to individuals earlier that can prevent readmissions. And so we're seeing a lot of those themes and how to direct patients in the right way to get the care that they need that's better and cheaper. So a
Right.
lot of those kind of like insure tech within healthcare,
Yeah.
a lot of those themes are stuff that we're looking at.
It's interesting because we also are looking at exactly what you just mentioned in a couple of companies that are focused on social determinants of health, since I think we've seen that the pandemic's affected people in marginalized communities more. We also looked at a couple of telehealth and in-home care plays, some drug discovery and drug interaction data to see how clinical trials are functioning during this time. But what's interesting is nothing got, you were talking about making it more affordable. That's definitely not what we're seeing on the deal side, where it's still very expensive, especially the healthcare deals. I mean, they're like 30 or 40 times revenue in some cases. So it's been a bit harder, I think, in this market to find a deal unless we're really leading it and going. Uh,
There's so much changing right under our feet, and
right.
it's an interesting time to be in venture capital. Would love to hear kind of like your thoughts on you literally wrote a book on venture capital.
Yeah.
So what's changing? What's stale from your perspective? I would love to hear.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that what I'm seeing is, when this pandemic originally started, people thought, okay, it'll be things will swing back into the investors' kind of advantage, right, with pricing.
Right.
And except for, the first couple of months, we haven't seen that. And I think, excuse me, I think that's because just human psychology and a lot of things that we see, we anticipate that are going to happen down the pike, right? So we anticipate that there'll be less entrepreneurs starting companies, and people may say, I could stay at Google or I could stay at Facebook one more year. And so when you see good teams, great teams are getting better, way better pricing than they probably got a year ago.
What you mentioned, so I had done a pretty extensive research project for a couple of years. I published a book back in 2014, which was called Disruptors, and that was all based off of interviews with founders right as they were getting started. So the premise of that was, can I find these people who were at Google or Facebook and were looking for that motivation to quit their job, but didn't know what the first 6 months of that would look like, of no salary or having fights with their spouse or whoever it is because they've decided to go all in on something that maybe someone else doesn't believe in. And it was actually pretty great where I spoke to Andrew Yang right as he was getting started with Venture for America, with founders of Pinterest and Betterment and LearnVest. So several really interesting founders. And that put me onto a path where I think most of them, and when I was on the book tour, everybody was fascinated about what venture capitalists care about. And which I find pretty interesting given where you're usually trying to stay, or most VCs are trying to stay behind the scenes and make the investments. So the second book was all interviews with VCs. It was called Finding Genius, published it last October, and interviewed the founders of kind of VCs behind Founders Fund and Andreessen and Greycroft and several other venture funds that are out there, and specifically their theses on how the world's changing and where they're investing and what they define as genius. But what was interesting, and I think based off of your experiences with Backstage and everything that you guys were accomplishing over there, many of the VCs I was speaking with represented one type of socioeconomic background, one geography, one education class, one gender. And so I was trying to find a more diverse audience. So the back 10 chapters are actually written by a diverse group of principals and like junior partners who wrote chapters on specific verticals in their theses. So it's interesting. It was interesting just hearing their perspectives and seeing how they have seen things change. But I guess we saw venture capital change over 20 years as people like and the new generation of venture capitalists have come in and said, okay, this is what we demand and this is how we want things to change. And now you're seeing people push gender diversity at the board level. But in COVID, in the 1 year since I published it, I think many of the VCs before when the book was published were saying there's a reckoning coming. There's too much money out there and things change. There's too many people starting companies right now, and we'll continue to back them. But it seems like, maybe like you're right that COVID probably has kept some founders on the sidelines from wanting to start companies. But also one of the themes that kept coming up was that there is founders that have staying power or conviction during downtimes as well are the ones that people want to fund. So I imagine those have kind of risen above the stack now of saying, you know what, even during this pandemic, we can try to make our company last and last on limited cash or limited resources and figure out new ways of getting customers. So I think we've seen, FreightWaves has done it in really interesting ways, going all live events, taking their live events and shifting them all digital. Some other companies in our portfolio have either struggled or done really well with it. So it's interesting to see that bifurcation of the market also. But I don't know if you're seeing that as well in the West Coast, your work with Backstage and Prologis and now and how all that's evolved for you too. It'd be interesting to hear about that.
Yeah, I think similarly, we're seeing kind of like this bifurcation, right? So if you're a top A+ team, you're getting treated like it. But the difference than like a year ago is a B+ team and a B team are being treated like a C-level team, right? They're kind of like waiting in the water, trying to get capital. Maybe they're raising at a flat round. So that's one thing that's changing. The other thing is just how we do diligence, right? It has to be digitally like this. And I think we first anticipated, this only lasts for 2 months. We'll do what we need to do and we'll get back to it. And that's just not the case. And if you want, because there's so much money on the sidelines and so much capital, so many venture firms, so many hedge funds doing venture and growth now, that if you wait for the kind of typical, cycle of, oh, hear about a company, they start raising, and in 6 weeks they're thinking about closing, then you're not going to get many deals done, especially not great deals done. And so I think for the next 9 to 12 months, it will be preemptive season. So, talking to a lot of different VCs about, how do you double and triple down on your thesis, right? And what areas have you been successful on? What other companies are coming up and emerging through those theses? And how do you get in front of those companies earlier rather than later when some kind of very large, kind of well branded firm can simply just give them a, you know, X million dollars, $100 million pre-money evaluation.
Yeah, and get pushed out. We just touched on something, maybe it's a bit controversial, so you don't have to name any of the companies that you're working with, because I saw you're on the board of several different companies. You served on the boards of Prologis. When you're talking about those B plus teams, or that are now operating like C plus teams, where the board might need to step in and support them more, how do you think about that? Like during this time when founders are also looking to their board for support, but are also maybe a bit like, how do venture capitalists, in your experience, since you've had this experience on the board, thinking about how you support them and bring up the C plus teams, or decide when to riff it, or the A plus teams, and how do you see your role with those kind of companies?
Well, I mean, I've been lucky enough to always be working with, at least like B and B plus teams, right? Management team. And sometimes you can have an A team, but be in a B market, right? And it's about like, do you believe in a long-term thesis? If so, continue to like support that team, help them get done. And I know when all this happened in March, we really buckled down and focused inward in our portfolio. We didn't do much kind of outreach for the first kind of like 8 weeks of the. We just wanted to make sure who's raising, who's going to have to raise in this period, and let's make sure that they get the support that they need. And let's get around the table. There are other investors who are also insiders, and let's make sure we're thinking about this appropriately. And so I think you have to continue to do that, because some of these things, not everything's going to have a tailwind from COVID, and not everything that has a tailwind from COVID should you invest in. And so it's really thinking about what are the underlying themes and trends that you think are going to shape the 20s. And that's what I've been really just trying to think about. And you can do that and develop those theses in different ways. Um, but I like to gather information from a lot of different parties, whether it be from other VCs, my founders, other founders, or I think a very untapped market that a lot of people just don't have access to, or don't want to have access to, is I talk to a lot of people at big companies, right, that are shaping. They will be the buyers. Our startups will be vendors of theirs, and so I try to make sure that I have my ear to the ground on how are these big companies shaping the future of their industry, because a lot of them need to not have the same hubris that they had for the last 10, 15 years when saying they can build it themselves. And now they need to focus on their core business, and simply they're looking for technology to solve key pain points.
That was one of the interesting things too when we were interviewing these VCs. They were all talking about that point that you just touched on, about the future makers and how they can predict what's going to happen 5 or 6 years from now and have to draw all the points in. And a VC needs to be able to sit across the table and see that as well and believe in it. And I think you were just talking about this with healthcare as well, of how you get smart on a space quickly when founders have spent 20 or 30 years just building companies within that. That's what I'm working on now too, and I'm doing it mostly through founders and speaking with Hearst has a fairly large health division, so we've been relying on them fairly often. But it's definitely interesting when things continue to evolve, especially in the payer market, or on the regulation side, healthcare can shift so quickly. And I imagine many of the founders that are watching this are within the freight industry, and similarly, the results of tomorrow's election can change the entire market as well. So I think the VCs, at least I've spoken with, have a very longer term perspective and horizon on building these companies and seeing what's going to happen a decade out. So it's definitely.
As we're kind of almost at our allotted time, what are some areas or that you're really interested in, or that your firm's interested in, themes that are around kind of this, the idea of commerce and supply chain logistics? Are there some other areas that you guys are, really looking at?
Yeah, we have. I think our investment in FreightWaves was predicated on that as well. I mean, they had become a pretty prominent media brand within the space, so they had become a very interesting information hub where they had the information edge to build new products within software and launch the futures products. So it took us into three different products with enterprise SaaS, within media, and within kind of the financial products that they were launching. So that was sort of our, at least Hearst Ventures entry investment into the freight space. Then we've made an investment in a company called Maven Machines as well. The partner that sits on the board and is very responsible for this, he was also sitting on the board of FreightWaves, is David Famulari on our team. So he's got more of an expert insight into the space and what we're looking at the moment, that I probably can't offer as much, since I've been spending most of my time on healthcare. But I think he's continuing to look at opportunities within transportation management systems, within the broader freight ecosystem, and how larger shippers, whether it's marine freight or it's air freight, where the opportunities are there as well, in robotics. So I think there's been some opportunities that he's considered and brought up. So I'm sure we'll tune him in for the next expert opinion there. What about you guys? What are you seeing on that side?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the same themes and the thesis around how do you optimize transportation within the entire, which is within different links of the supply chain, is something that I was doing at Prologis and I continue to look for.
Okay.
And so, we made an investment very early on this year in January in a company called Clear Now, which is an OCR technology for customs brokers, right? So typically that was a very human process where you're taking a lot of unstructured data like bill of lading faxes and documents associated with each container, and relying on humans to find the relevant data codes and then type that into the customs border patrol system. And so this company pulls all that, extracts all that data, relevant data, and makes a process that was once maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, to now 10, 15 minutes. And so I saw that as kind of one of the first dominoes to starting the delays within the supply chain. So I continue to look for things that optimize significant points within the supply chain. And then another thing that I'm just looking at all enterprise is we've had this data kind of move to like more data, right? So data is the new oil, was like coined last decade. And so companies are generating more and more data and trying to get smarter on how to leverage this data to make better decisions. And this is happening in every industry. And so, we have tools that are going after extraction and cleaning data, but I really think that some of the biggest options or use cases within supply chain as well as in other industries is middleware is one. And so how do you make sure that you have pipes that all these different components of data and sources of data are getting sent to the right places? And then second is security within data. And so how to make sure that you can identify which users should have access to what data, because you don't want, if there's so many different partners within this kind of data stream, you don't want people getting access and to things that they shouldn't be having. So those are two areas that I'm looking in within logistics and supply chain, as well as just healthcare.
We're looking at we're looking at an interesting middleware company in healthcare, so I'll send that to you after this. We can get her offline. I don't know how. I think we're out of time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're out of time. It was really great chatting, Kunal.
Yeah, it's good to meet you, and hopefully catch up soon.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks.